All right. Hey, everybody. Central Ohio is so glad to see you once again. Today is Wednesday. It's 3 o'clock. And so you know what time it is. The time for that brotherly discussion around health, wealth, and race. I mean, all really fun issues. But today, we got OSU representing us today. And I know everybody's got something to say about OSU. Not looking too good for football season. You know, I mean, that's a whole other thing. We might get shut down here if I get talking about that. But you all know this has been 2020 has been just a crazy year. I don't know about you, but I'm just feeling like overwhelmed. It's July. We headed into August now, and I'm just like, man, we still got 5 months left of this year. And I mean, we don't know what's happening. I understand the governor's had a big announcement tonight. Who knows what that's going to be? I'm sure it ain't good news. And so, we'll see how that goes. But you all in many ways are on the front line of this discussion. And I would ask you, we go, try to keep our comments short so that we give everybody a chance to answer a question or to just speak. B, we want to allow for people who are watching, our viewers, to you can go on Facebook, y'all, and just send us a question. I'd love to ask the question. You can tell me who you want to direct it to. And we want to be able to get through the full suite of questions. And so a lot going on. Let's just start with a basic introduction. And by the way, this is my first women. I got, Autumn and Charity. Everybody knows you. So it's not like people got to be introduced to y'all. But it's fun to have you all on this show, and we got so much to talk about. But here's what I've been asking folks to do. If you had 30 seconds to introduce yourself to somebody, and you just wanted to say, this is the best of me, this is it in 30 seconds, and they're going to take it or leave it, what would you say for your introduction? So we're going to start with Kyle, because I know Kyle already got his 30-second. He walked around with his 30-second introduction piece in his head. So we're going to start with Kyle. You got 30 seconds.
Well, I appreciate that, Commissioner. Name is Kyle Strickland from Columbus, Ohio. Went to Ohio State for undergrad, Harvard for law school, and now I work at the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, where we look at issues of race, we look at issues of equity, and how we can build the type of community that we need to build. And just grateful to be here. Hope that was good.
So I would just tell you, if this was like a date and that was your introduction, I'd be like, yeah, all right, yeah, I'm out of here. Yeah.
Exactly.
So we want the substance and I want to come back for a second date type of. So now the next person has to do better than that. So I'm gonna go with Autumn, because I know Autumn. She got her little speech ready too. So let's hear it. 30 seconds. Who is Autumn?
Well, Kyle threw me off, but 30 seconds. If I had to introduce myself, I would say my name is Autumn Glover. Most importantly, I'm James's wife, so I don't need a second date. And so those are probably the things that I would introduce myself with first. But today I'm happy to share with you that I have the privilege and the honor to really think about the ways that Ohio State shows up in the community, and specifically have been able to do that on the Near East Side for about 10 years.
You know what? You get a second date. You got second date coming. Yeah, you got it. You did it. You did that. It was perfect. You did that. It was perfect. All right, Doc, it's on you. Tell us about Dr. Gray.
So I'm Daryl Gray. I am a believer, husband, father, and a doctor as well. I am a Columbus transplant. So I'm originally from Baltimore, Maryland. I've been living in Columbus, and Columbus is home. I have 3 kids that have been born here. So Columbus is home, living here now for close to 6 years. And I have the pleasure of serving, and I get to serve patients. I get to serve our diverse communities. I get to serve our staff and faculty and learners at the Ohio State, and that's what I love most.
All right, yeah, you get a second date. Yeah, you get a second date. Yeah, all right, we're gonna call you the next day. All right, Charity, I ain't even worried about this, so I know I already gonna give Charity a second day, because we just know. Who are you?
I know you're gonna get it started. Charity Martin King, first and foremost, go Bucks, OH.
I-O.
Director of Social Change under the Office of Student Life with The Ohio State University. I am a wife, a mother. I'm a Zeta in my sorority, but most of all, a servant of God. I have a background in athletics for a number of years, a recently retired basketball coach in the city of Columbus as well. So I am okay with being in a room with a bunch of guys having conversations.
Right. Well, I'm glad you are, because we got some stuff that we really need to talk about. As I said, 2020 has been just a crazy year, no matter where you work or what you do. But how are you feeling? I mean, I know for myself, just to start us off, I don't know. There are times where I feel hopeful, because I believe that right before our eyes, we are setting the tone for the next chapter in American history. But I've been here before. For those of us who are old enough to remember the Rodney King riots and how it sort of changed and shaped America for a moment. And then we kind of went back to something else. And so, Charity, I think you and I are closer in age. You probably remember the Rodney King. I mean, we're only 30, but you probably remember the Rodney King. Is this time different? And how are you feeling?
People keep talking about something's different about this time. I don't know that I necessarily believe that, because I think people would say back then, this is something different when Rodney King happened. Maybe they thought this is something different with the women's suffrage movement protest. Maybe they thought this is something different when Emmett Till, when television, with the invention of television and the civil rights movement came to your living room. So I really want to be careful about saying it's something different, because I always want to honor the ancestors in that way, that there are things that they were doing that something different. What I do think is a contrast, because young people have been in the thick of this for a long time, including Dr. King. He was very young. Oftentimes we see him as this older iconic figure, but he and I think Malcolm X died both at the age of, were assassinated at the ages of 39. So we're not too far removed from having a young guided movement. The social media ability to connect faster, I think, is what's different. The able to mobilize across the globe through that type of platform so that you can synchronize efforts in a more concerted way is the most different thing. When people are filming and when people are doing call out politics, holding folks accountable in real time, that ability to connect with speed is, I think, the only part of this that I would say is that something different.
Yeah, man, that's spot on. I feel the same way. Kyle, tell me, what do you think? How you feeling? You feeling this is a different time? And do you remember the Rodney King? How much do you know about the time in America when? And the thing I think about Rodney King was, it was the first time we really saw that kind of police brutality played out on video, and it was national and international. And now every 5-year-old has a camera phone, and we see footage, body camera footage, storefront footage, and we see it all over the news. And so things seem a little different. But do you remember do you know much about Rodney King's situation? And then how you feeling now about the change environment?
Of course. So I don't have any firsthand memory of Rodney King. I was a little too young there, but I know obviously the history of it and how it relates. And I think to Charity's point of what we're talking about is, there's always a tendency for us to say, well, this moment is different. And I think in the moment, that's true, right? There are always different factors that make this a different moment. But I do think there is something particularly unique about the confounding events that we are in right now, which is we are also in the midst of a pandemic that is unlike anything we've ever seen in our lifetimes. And so as a result of that, on top of the years of movements that have been building towards this moment, when we talk about Black Lives Matter, even just the past 5 years about how that movement has grown to really be up in people's faces to say, this is a multiracial coalition that we're seeing calling for change, willing to, as Charity just pointed out, calling people out. I mean, it is uncomfortable for people to have these conversations, and we've kind of let it slide for too long. And I think more people are willing to say, we've got to hold you accountable to the moment we're in because it's unacceptable. And some are upset because they think, well, it's cancel culture and people can say what they want to say, give them some room to say what they want to say, when in fact, we know that a lot of those same people just aren't willing to be tolerant of other folks, right? And it's diminishing so many people's experiences. And so I think this moment is giving people a perfect opportunity to really lift up those experiences. But I also think it's important for us not to just think of it as an opportunity, because with this transformative nature of where we're at, there's also a lot of tragedy, a lot of trauma and vulnerability. And so we can't be too hopeful in the midst of recognizing that trauma.
But overall, you feel positive, though. You do feel like you see something. I want to make sure I got that.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. You know, I don't know how I'll be feeling in November or December, right? And I think if certain decisions are made, I mean, we'll see on the trajectory of where we're going. But I think it's important for us not to just think that we are on a natural progressive trajectory, right? We're going to have to push for that.
Yeah.
And so I'm positive that people can do it.
Absolutely. Okay. Dr. Gray, come on. I mean, you have a different perspective as a physician because you're sort of more immersed in the pandemic elements that are disparately impacting African Americans. But the overall environment. A, do you remember the Rodney King? Are you old enough to remember the Rodney King environment? And then B, how you feeling about now, even in comparison to that?
Man, I must look really young. Y'all see, I don't have any hair, right? So I definitely remember the Rodney King riots for sure. I was old enough to remember that, and I agree with the statements that not much has really changed since then. But social media has allowed this to be viewed by people of all ages across the world very quickly. In that, and to Kyle's point, and to what you just said, we're living amidst two pandemics. One preceded the other. And let's not be fooled that COVID-19 is the first pandemic. No, it's actually systemic inequity is the first pandemic. That's much, much, much older than COVID-19. And so we're seeing that borne out in healthcare, borne out in our communities. And certainly, the thing that I think, I am somewhat hopeful because kind of like what's been said, as you look at what's been happening with the protests and things that have resulted from protests, as I even look at our own health system at Ohio State, some of the things that have been borne out as a result of people's voices from all backgrounds, from all colors, amplifying their voices, we have now a very accelerated momentum towards change. And, I'm honored to be able to serve alongside many others, including Autumn, in really continue to push the envelope while we have this moment. I think the opportunity that we have, as well as to strengthen the relationships we have with the community. So OSU is not much different than many anchor institutions or academic medical centers in that, albeit we provide a lot of the care to the communities in which we reside, the communities don't always trust us. Right. And that's historical, right? And we can go back and talk about things that have happened whether we're talking about Henrietta Lacks and Johns Hopkins, whether we're talking about other kind of things that have happened within communities of color that have involved academic institutions, whether it's research or care, right? And so we all have to, particularly in academic medical centers, we have to partner with our communities better in building trust. I think Autumn says change happens at the pace of trust, right? And so we always have to ensure that we're garnering trust with our communities. And part of trust is not just showing up when you're ready to do a research study or build a new building in the community, right? Building trust in relationships is being present at the barbershop talks, is being present at the African American Male Wellness Initiative walks, is being present with different health fairs that churches are having, is being present at different, showing up at someone's graduation or having a lunch with a community member. That's what being present is about. And that's how relationships happen. And so what I'm excited to see is that more of those things are happening as a result of some of the things we've seen with both pandemics.
Man, that you hit the nail on the head right there. I'm serious, man, because OSU has a unique moment too, because the timing of a new president allows for a cultural shift to happen institutionally. And while the institution is a mammoth and a mega part of this community, it starts with the leadership. And if the president can drive in a new voice, and I think your points are spot on. I've been through 3 presidents where I've been in a leadership position to engage in them. And every single time they come in this community and they fail to do that broader connection that Autumn talks about, where trust is a part of it, not just now it's time for research, now it's time we're doing this facility, now we're doing this, and you just expect that, because we love OSU football or we love OSU as an institution, it just is going to transfer into the community. Man, you hit that right on hit the nail on the head. And I hope that you are able to communicate that kind of perspective to the new president. Autumn, why don't you pick up from there, since we use so much of your sayings. Give us some more knowledge.
This is all of our work, right? So
do you remember Rodney King?
I do remember Rodney King, and I will say that I teach civic engagement in our Glenn College, and I always say to our students, and there are people who study this, every generation has generational events that shift the way we think about ourselves and we think about our society. So we are absolutely in a generational moment. I think more recent generational moments were Hurricane Katrina, 9/11. You know, there are things that have shifted the way we look at our society. And I think that's a powerful moment. To what all of you have said, I think shame on us if we don't use this momentum to really advance conversations differently. So I feel a lot of responsibility. I think embedded in that is hope, but I do feel incredibly responsible for leveraging whatever seat I have to think about how we move forward for a new normal, because normal definitely did not work for everyone. And I think for Dr. Gray's point, both of these pandemics met us as a society that was already sick. If we really, I mean, we were already sick. And so, you know, I think we both, as we're suffering through the trauma of this moment, we should also be grateful for the pause, this universal pause to really reflect. And so how I'm feeling is very responsible. I think there's a lane for everybody in this work. And so Dr. Gray and I are really thinking about kind of how do we leverage this large anchor institution to really build that trust and help people be empowered to achieve optimal health and well-being. It's not just because we said so. We want people and their families to be well, and whatever that means for them. And then Charity's lane is really using young people. As she said, young people have always been the voice of movement. And so again, there's a lane for everybody. And I think we all have responsibility to be working with each other and collaborating, but also staying focused on our focus, right? So I'm not going to be able to do all the things, but I can focus on the things that are within my reach. So I feel incredibly responsible in this generational moment, and there will be more, right? So our kids will have generational moments, and hopefully they're watching us, you know, step up to the plate.
Yeah, I mean, I think you really touched on a few things that I think trigger a real deeper dive on some things. But before we go into that, let me just give a shout out to Trudy Bartley, offload from OSU. Trudy Bartley is like my OSU police. If I say something negative about OSU, she will call me within 30 seconds to you know, advocate on behalf of OSU. So Trudy, good to see that you're watching us. Our Deputy Administrator, Keena Smith, who's been on every week, thank you so much for joining us. Nathaniel Jordan, he does a lot of things in the community, but thanks for joining us. And then Carter Womack, y'all know Carter. And so thanks for having us. I want to ask you all to share on social media, because part of the whole purpose of this conversation is that it is a community-wide conversation, and not just the folks who are on this panel or me, that it's the community. So let's dig right into some things. You know, Autumn, you made me think of a couple of these really major issues that are in the moment, in the time, and it's really a point of discussion, no matter what community you live in, whether you're Black, white, East Side, West Side, whatever. But there's this whole movement about defunding the police. And A, what does it mean? Let's talk about what it means to you and how you see the perspective. And B, do you agree? Do you think that, you know, we should look at the constructs of how we fund law enforcement and just defunding the police in general? Who wants to start off first? I'll just throw it out there. I'm a pick now.
I'll respond because I probably know I have the least amount of opinion here yet. So what I'll say is I think defunding the police is something that I think we should be talking about it, right? But I think the first step is we need to decide for ourselves as a community, whether it's at the local level, at the state level, across our country, what does safety even mean to us, right? And so we need to first figure out what that is and if the police play a role in that. And I think that sounds like a basic question, but I think we really need to acknowledge that. Secondly, I think, and again, this is me thinking about talking to my Glenn College students, people should actually understand what's in budgets. And as citizens, we have a responsibility to be paying attention to that and not down on our elected officials for the decisions that they make, because these meetings are public, these conversations are public. And so I think we all need to educate ourselves first on what does safety mean? How do we get there? Like, what is really our aspiration? What is the role that the police play in that? But then also, who knows what's in the budgets? I mean, we need to be asking better questions before, we get behind a movement. Now, somebody much smarter than me started that slogan and got that hashtag going. And so I want them to educate me. And maybe it's some of you on this call, but I think first, my question as a citizen first, and as a mom and a wife, frankly, a mom of a Black child and a mom of a Black husband, I want to know first, what is safety and what does that mean to us as a society? So
That's fair. Okay. All right. Who's up?
I'm gonna hop in. I'm gonna wait on you, Dr. Gray, and then I'll hop in.
Oh, ladies
This
first,
is the
please.
brotherly conversation.
I was always taught ladies first, so please go ahead.
Now, see, why didn't you add that in your 30-second intro? See, that would be a big deal. If you had said that, you would have had to know. Charity, please.
Defund, abolish, reform. Okay. Those have been some of the three phrases that we continue to hear when we talk about policing. I have been alarmed at the amount of, well, let me say the lack of education surrounding what these things mean. Defund does not mean abolish. It means examining resources, looking at taxpayer dollars. Why does over close to maybe 37% of the city budget go to policing when we know that policing does not necessarily solve problems, right? So maybe we can reallocate those resources somewhere else. Some people are saying the language of reform. Let's reform the police. Policing will always exist. And to be blunt and frank, is that when we look at systemic racism, the policing system in its inception was not designed to serve Black people. It was designed to do just that, police Black people. So can you really reform a system that from its inception, historically, and this isn't my opinion, this is a historical fact, so you can look it up, cite the sources. So this is something that did not apply to our community. So you have defund, you have reform, and then you have abolish. There's a school of thought that says that the policing system should be totally dismantled and abolished in its entirety in a whole different way. And I want to echo what Autumn is saying, a whole different way of safety. People feeling, and everyone on the panel has talked about trust. So is that system that has folded into systemic racism, which is going to deal with, because of social change at the Ohio State University, we deal with poverty and how those things affect poverty, healthcare, all of those systemic issues. Can you really address those things in a reform model, as opposed to we need to right now use this momentum to, again, as Autumn is saying, reimagine what that looks like, because we know something is broken. And so as long as we continue, some people are totally uncomfortable with anything new. If we abolish or we defund or we reform, I'm nervous because my child won't feel safe in the parking lot or my child will be afraid at school. That's not what this is. And there is a real prison pipeline that is happening in urban schools and systems and communities that we can no longer ignore. And so defunding the police is a real conversation that we must have.
Okay, that's legit. So let me give a shout out to my favorite state representative, Erica Crowley, who's joining us. And she's doing some work, some really good work, by the way, in the legislature on some of these topics. And Erica, I need to get you on so you can talk about that with this group that follows this call. So I will definitely hope you'll join us in the future. And then let me give a shout out to my colleagues, John O'Grady and Marilyn Brown, who have just been so dedicated to this conversation, dedicated to this cause. We started this work around poverty in 2018 together, where we start to peel back the layers and look at Franklin County in terms of some of the disparate numbers that impact some communities and not others. And I want to thank and acknowledge them for being such great partners in this conversation. And certainly Ken Wilson, our county administrator, who handles all the nuts and bolts and makes sure that we are able to do our job in the right way. So thanks for joining me. Dr. Gray, I think you were up next. How you feel about this conversation around defunding the police and what does it mean to you?
Yeah, as both Autumn and Charity were talking about this, a quote came to mind, and it's not my quote. Let me put that out there. But the quote states, "Every system is perfectly designed to get the results that it gets." And that's what we're seeing. This is, what we're seeing is not some aberration of the system. It's the result of how the system was designed. as we talk about, if we translate that to healthcare, you know, and we look at things like health disparities, right? Our systems were designed to foster those things. And so what's happening now is we are redesigning and reimagining healthcare and how healthcare delivery happens. And we've seen over the past few years, new models of healthcare emerge because we realize that the system is not right and we need to fix it. Same thing with policing. You know, some of the things that we've seen with police brutality is not just because we've had some bad apples, right? It's because the system has allowed that to happen, has allowed those bad apples to get through and for these results to happen. And so we have to reimagine what that looks like. But part of that, and going back to Autumn's point, is that I think a first step is we have to educate everyone on safety, but also what policing is. And I liken that to many of the conversations I've been engaged now with people who have up till now been able to ignore racism because it didn't directly apply to them or their kids. And so they have, you know, these are the conversations we've all had with people saying, help me to understand what systemic racism is. Help me to understand my role and what I can do with, for example, my white privilege to help to break down these barriers and help to eliminate racism, right? Same thing. We need to have the same conversations about safety and policing. I was in a conversation recently when, you know, people were just saying they were so appalled and just so taken aback by what they saw with George Floyd, right? But to Charity's point, we've seen things like this happen for decades, generations happen. It's more advertised now because of social media, but we've seen these things happen. And yes, it's been perpetuated by some bad policing. And so we have to, you know, whereas there have been folks in our community who have, you know, not seen previously or been able to ignore that bad policing or the results of bad policing, it's front and center in their face now. We have to help them understand our experience, whether it be, you know, if I'm talking to my friends and family who've met, had their backs against the wall or had guns pulled on them because stop and frisk policing, whether it's, you know, those of us, me included, racially profiled, pulled over because I look a certain way. I don't have my white coat on in my car when I'm riding around and going to the grocery store, or if I'm going in a store, I'm not going to wear my doctor's outfit because people say, well, aren't you a doctor? Yeah, but I wear sweatpants when I go grocery shopping, you know? So, you know, we have to help educate.
Even in the grocery store,
exactly.
You need to have your white coat on and all that when you're in the grocery store. That's the way it is.
Right. So, you know, we have to continue to have these dialogues with folks as they are trying to become more informed. Yep.
Yeah. Man, you guys are just so spot on. And I feel like this is a complicated question because when people say defund the police, what they're really saying is we need to, as you all have said so eloquently, we need to rethink law enforcement. We need to undo, you know, our historical view of policing. Kyle, is everybody on point? You feel the same way, or you see it differently, or?
So I think everybody is on point, and I think Charity did a great job, really kind of providing a summary that they're not all the same, right? You know, defund, reform, abolish, right? And people see those differently, right? I mean, some people are saying, yeah, just completely defund, just completely abolish the police, because it really is about this fundamental view around reimagining community safety. And I think it's important that wherever you fall on the spectrum, to recognize that we need to have this conversation. The facts are that, the abolition movement, the defund movement, they have shifted the conversation in the playing field. We're not just simply talking about reform. We're talking about fundamental transformations for how this works. I mean, we are in a society that decides that policing is going to be the answer to every single problem, when in fact, we should not be having policing as the answer to every single problem. We have to think about not just law enforcement, but about how as a society, we also police other people's behavior, how we have people who decide to call the cops on people and turn situations into something that they don't need to be, right? There's so much there that goes into something deeper about what does it mean to be safe? And now what we're seeing, because it's an election season, people are worried about kind of the language, and they see these ads about, wow, the police departments aren't there and everybody's coming to get you, when a lot of this stuff is coded that Black and brown people are criminals and are coming for your communities. A lot of this stuff is coded, it's racialized, it's racist, and it's embedded in this idea of what does it mean to be safe? Some people think police, when a lot of folks think police, I don't feel safe in their presence, right? So we have to have that conversation. I think this is shifting us in that moment in the right direction.
Man, yeah, I mean, you was kind of preaching right there. You know, you preaching, and I think you're right. You know, and I think it was Charity that mentioned earlier the call outs. You know, for whether it's elected officials and whatnot. So let me just shift this conversation a little bit too. And I don't mind being called out as elected official. Quite frankly, it comes as a territory, and it just means to me people are paying attention, and I like that. I think it helps me be a better politician. It helps me be, you know, better and more responsive to public service. So I invite that kind of feedback, invite letters and calls that I always get, I might add. But I got one recently. I got one yesterday I want to share with you. I'm not going to go into detail, but I will talk about the content. I want your thoughts on this. And so I received a letter from a woman, and she lives here in Columbus. And the letter started off by saying, I really enjoyed reading the article on the front page of the Dispatch a couple of weeks ago about you and your background. And, you know, what a great story that is in this broader context about racism and being able to make it in this country and so forth and so on. And then she goes on to say, however, I think you set a poor example for other Black men because you were down there protesting with Congresswoman Beatty. You were down there with the protesters with Congresswoman Beatty and Council President Shannon Hardin. And she went on to say that that is not a good example. And I think that you're a poor example of what other Black men should see, you know. And she said, and she went on to say that Black Lives Matters. She said that Black Lives Matter have threatened to burn down cities. And here you are standing with these folks. And, you know, so I try to respond to every letter and every call personally. That one I'm definitely going to be responding to. But I want to just hear your thoughts about that. You know, what do you think about politicians who sit on the sideline and don't show up to you know? And let me just preface the comments about why we're at the protest. Congresswoman Beatty and President Hart and myself have been working on a constituent case the days leading up to that, where a gentleman on the east side was arrested and locked up. And we had been working together to get him out of jail. And it was all connected to the George Floyd. It's a long story. The point is that we met Saturday morning at 7 a.m. We were on a call, the three of us, and we're going through what we needed to do, what had happened, and where things were with this young man. It was successful. We had gotten him released and things were working out. And Congresswoman Beatty, and I'm making a long story short, Congresswoman Beatty said, hey, I think we should go stand with the protesters to encourage them to be peaceful, to encourage them to be nonviolent, and to show them that, you know, that we hear you, we're a part of this. And we said, okay, let's go together. We'll all go together. It'll have a presence and an impact. We'll go stand with them. We kneeled with them. We put our fist up with them. We talked to folks, and then the incident happened. But now you always have this other side of folks who see it differently. So I'm curious as what you think about the call outs, and should politicians sit on the sideline in those kind of environments, or should we go out and be, subject to whatever could happen? So who wants to take that first?
Dr. Gray, because I took a picture with you, Kevin, Commissioner.
That's right, Boyce. We did. That's right.
Let's be for real, because the day that happened, I took a photograph with you, Councilmember Hardin, Congresswoman Beatty, as I was circling the State House with some students. And also that same day was tear gassed. I had been pepper sprayed the night before, okay, because I'm out there with my students. And the simple fact, and then I'm gonna yield to Dr. Gray, that our leadership that is an African-American male, Black male, has to preface his statement as to why you were there. It's problematic for me. That's it kind of different for me. The fact that you have to explain why you show up. You ran track, right, Commissioner Boyce? Did you ever run relay? You a track star, right, back in the day?
Show up there.
Relay, you a relay? Okay, so if your constituency, okay, you running that and they say stick, and we're expecting something from you in the leg of this race and in this journey. So if I'm calling on my commissioners, my congresswoman, my city council rep to show up as a show of solidarity to say, hey, we hear you. We're paying attention to what's going on. This is your constituency. Since when do we have to validate why we're there, number one, as leaders? Second of all, for anyone to define manhood or womanhood to a human being is out of bounds. So I must say that, and then I must say to all the viewership, I think that people owe you all our scholarship and our leadership an apology for how you were handled that day, but not just you, but the other leaders and young folks that have been on the ground, including our students with The Ohio State University, the ones here from Capital, Ohio Dominican, and et cetera. So let me make sure I say that, in our Columbus City School students who have advocating for social justice. I yield.
Who wants to go next? Who wants to take that one next?
I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's problematic. You know, as you were talking, Charity, I was like, you know, I thought back to comments like Autumn and other friends that I have that know my background and my interest in policy, and even family members are like, are you going to go into politics? And my response is always no. And that is part of the reason, right? To have to feel like I have to restrict my own personal values, what I stand for, because of what a constituent thinks, or that, you know, that I can't act upon what I know to be the right thing to do, is something that I think I would personally feel restricted by, and it would personally impact my own happiness, I think. But to the point that you made, I think, you know, it has to be genuine. So to your question, I think it has to be genuine. Seeing you out there is genuine, right? But we can all think of people who, if they were out there, we would think, oh, it's a photo op. It's not genuine, right? This is a person who's not necessarily been present on the ground in the community. And so it's not the same recipe for everyone. You being out there, I think, was right on par with, you know, what your goals and mission has been. If someone else had been out there, and I'm not just thinking about Columbus, I'm thinking about other states and nationally and things like that. It's not genuine. It's a photo op. And so, you know, I don't agree with the person that wrote the letter. I think it was important for you to be out there. You know, other healthcare providers at OSU, we participated in the protests safely and peacefully. So yeah, just my thoughts.
Yeah.
I'll jump in here. Yeah. So a couple of things. So one, you know, I think it's important for folks to recognize that everybody has an opinion, and that's cool, right? And whatever, right? And I think in many cases, people want to make their voices heard about what you should or should not do. This goes back to policing people's behavior. This is what people do about protesters. There's always a debate about the type of tactics that protesters have, and they should be doing X or they should be talking about Y. And it's like, look, everybody's got a lane to play. And if you're going to focus your energy and your outrage on why somebody did something wrong here rather than the underlying injustice, then that's a problem, right? That's a distraction from where we're at. And so, you know, I think everybody's going to question people's motives, and there's only as much as you can do is say, look, this is what I believe in. This is what I want to be a part of. This is authentically myself and me standing in solidarity, but knowing that you got to be open to being called out, right? And so I think those types of things, it's, you know, it is what it is. You get those types of responses. There are some others that challenge us and look to even hold us even more accountable. That says, well, you know, for example, when we're in times of national unrest and national protest, we might have leaders who can step up and say something. In these moments, we say peaceful protest, but we also know that even locally, when the tension isn't as much on, we tend to dismiss protesters, right? And there have been instances right here in Columbus where we've kind of dismissed them and said, well, you know, there are other tactics that we need to go on. And so I think it's important for us as, you know, elected leaders, but also as community members, that everyone has a role to play. And so pushing people, holding them accountable is one thing. And then to be able to take that as an elected official to say that comes with the job. This is what I believe in, and I'm willing to take that criticism, and here's how I'm going to respond. You might act differently, but that's your prerogative to do so. And I think that's kind of the perspective that I have, is everybody's got a different lane and different role to play in this effort.
Sure. Okay. Autumn, what do you think? Do you want to
Well, I was just going to say, I was sitting here thinking about the draft response. So my first initial reaction was, you know, thank you for that feedback. And, you know, I hope you're staying well in these challenging times, right? But I do think it's an opportunity for education, to all of my friends here's point around, you know, we're talking about people's lives. And so one, and I love that Charity brought that up, that you shouldn't have to qualify while you were out there. Even if you were elected and Congresswoman Beatty and Councilmember Hardin didn't ask you to go, as a Black man, this is something that impacts your life every single day. And so it might be something that you care about, Dr. Gray's point, but I do think it's an opportunity for education. So the kind of administrator in me was trying to think about, well, what could he write back, right? Like, do you need to be brief or do you use it as an opportunity for education? I will say my expectation of my elected leaders is that they, to Dr. Gray's point, I just want to underscore it, is that they show up in a meaningful way. And so as we think about moving forward into this new normal, whatever that is for our society, and trying to be more anti-racist by nature, it has to be both in public and in private. And so you can't lead in that way if it's not your private practice as well. So not just because you're a Black elected, because I want to see my white and my other ethnic backgrounds also leading this way in public and in private, but acknowledging that people are watching. You know, I don't think that you guys were doing that in a performative way. You had a mission in mind. And so, you know, that's just my thought. So, you know, take it for what it is. Either it's a 4-sentence response, Commissioner Boyce, or it's a 2-page education. I don't, you know.
I mean, honestly, first of all, all your feedback is really good. But honestly, it'll be a lengthy response because, as you said, it's a teachable moment. You know, that how you interpret the Black Lives Movement, how you interpret my actions of standing with the protesters is your perspective, and I'm going to respect that. But I do feel obligated as an office holder to share with you mine. Doesn't mean you agree with me. Doesn't mean we have to be on the same page about it. You know, but I will share with you mine and why I disagree with the letter that she wrote. And you know, I don't set out to be a good example. I don't set out to make a statement by going down there. As someone, I think Dr. Gray said, it just kind of has to be what you do and who you are. That's just how I operate. And whether it comes with criticism or it comes with accolades, I can accept both, you know? And in fact, I often find the criticism to be as helpful as the accolades, because sometimes it exposes you to where you might have taken something, you know, maybe approached it in the wrong way. So it's a teachable moment from both sides. And I have to remember that for this person who wrote me in, at the end of the day, I am accountable to all 1.4 million residents who live here in Central Ohio. And I owe her a response, and I'm getting, don't mean we're going to agree, but I will be responding to it. So let me just kind of zero in for a second on you. But we talked about funding the police, defunding the police. I like this whole defund, abolish, and reform perspective. But embedded in that, as you all know, you all work at Ohio State, you know, is census information. You know, every 10 years, as you all know, we are required by our Constitution to take a census of the people who live in your community. And I want to emphasize that, live in the residents of your community. And it is census time right now. And talk about, from your own experience, how important the census is. Have you done your form? Have you all, you know, completed census? Everybody here has? Really? Y'all tell me, okay, all right, okay, because I did mine too.
I need to do my taxes, but I got my census. I got my census done.
Okay, all right. 1 out of 2 ain't bad. 1 out of 2 ain't bad. But just talk about what you know about the importance of the census. We got folks on the ground right now. It's so simple and easy to complete these days. But can you talk a little bit about the work you do and how the census might be connected to that and how important and valuable it is? Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I can start just, you know, I think about when we started PAC 10 years ago, it was right after a census had happened. And so for us, and thinking about our work, the census is important so we know who we're serving and we know kind of the demographics of the community, but importantly, that the services that they need are funded. And we know that Black and Brown communities are really suffering from that. And so, you know, we are really pushing and talking with our community residents about filling out the census and why it informs funding that comes into our community. I think that's been the most compelling point for folks to understand that is how things are funded in our community. It's not some magic formula behind Commissioner Boyce's suit jacket. It really is counting the citizens, and so we know who to serve. I think the other thing too, and Dr. Gray and I are involved in some of our work at OSU around anti-racism, is that we also have a position institution to talk with people about the census. And so we actually are right now exploring how we embed conversations about the census and voter registration with patient encounters. And so when you get that appointment reminder, we might also ask you, have you filled out your census? So you know, we're trying to work it from both angles, but on the ground level, I think about our schools in particular, and, you know, just employment opportunities and services through the county that we really need. And this is an opportunity for people to engage. And so I don't think about it just as servant to the people, but also for the people to take responsibility and be involved in a self-determined way. So we're definitely pushing it. And I can't believe 10 years has gone by. So I'm very anxious to see that in data as well.
Yeah.
No, I completely agree, Autumn. I think certainly at Ohio State, we, you know, there's such a great opportunity, particularly with the organizations with which we partner. So one that comes to mind is ETSS, Ethiopian Tewahedo Social Services, and, you know, how they serve new Americans in our Columbus community, you know, on the west side, north side, south side, east side. And, you know, the census is critical, just like you said, to the services that we provide to those communities and the resources that we dedicate to them. And so it's so important that we have champions like ETSS and others who are boots on the ground in those communities, delivering information about why it's important in a language and a manner in which they can understand. And so that's what's been really important with this partnership.
Yeah, how much, I mean, if we can build on that, how much of the data do you all use on the medical side that relates to census? You know, how much do you, and I know Kyle's going to talk about this because, I mean, they're all data driven. And so I'm sure they make a direct connection with census data, but talk about it from a health, even the pandemic, if you will, you know, I mean, how much has that data been helpful in how you are serving patients and how you are planning administratively and whatnot?
Our ability to serve and cater to the needs of our patients is only as good as the data that we have. And so, you know, whatever we have in our electronic health record, whatever data we can gather from the city, whatever data we can gather from the state and the county, or in working with the Kirwan Institute, that's about as good as it gets for us to be able to understand our catchment area as a health system, the patients that we serve, and the needs that they have. So that's why it's also so important to complete assistance, because really we use that information to really inform where we go as a health system and how we provide care.
And I mean, and I really wanted people to hear that, because if you don't complete the census, then you are diminishing our ability to serve your needs. And that's the real important disconnect that I think exists around, you know, the trust, as Autumn said earlier, the trust of the system, of those who collect the data, and then how we use that information. Kyle, I know that Curran is really steeped in data analysis and with the work you all do. I mean, talk about how you all use census data and how it impacts real people, real lives.
Yeah, so the census data is critical. So a couple of things. One is we know that historically, Black and Brown communities are underrepresented, undercounted in the census. You talk about both the trust factor, but then also just the engagement in terms of how our institutions have worked over time and how that's problematic. You even saw a lot of the conversations that were happening on the political level, where they were trying to add a citizenship question again, which is not part of the constitutional process of the census. Anybody living here is to be counted. That is part of the Constitution, regardless of citizenship status. So that's another example. But one of the things that we do with the data, it helps us determine the socioeconomic status and those factors in communities, right? I mean, we, in non-census years, we use American Community Survey data, which is like a shortened 3-year to 5-year or 1-year kind of survey that does a statistical analysis that helps us see where people are in communities. And then we combine that with other data sets, right? At the local level, the city and county level, as Dr. Gray mentioned, to really have a holistic view and picture of how many residents are living, or how many residents are living in a particular zip code. What is the background of that particular area? We get to see things like the infant mortality rates. We see all these things and merge it, overlay with the census data, which is so critical. And it's important too, because when we talk about how much is being invested in communities, so much of that is based off of our census information. And so we really have to stress the importance of that. And you need trusted messengers who can come in and talk about why that's key, why that's important to make sure we're investing in communities.
Man, I mean, you're spot on. And at the county, I will tell you, we work with Kerwin Institute to do an overlay of poverty trends in terms of geographic regions of Franklin County. And what that does is it allows us as a county to think about where we want to deploy resources over the next couple of years, so that if we see infrastructure breakdowns, if we see a public transit vacant spots or need areas, we can begin to plan to address that as we make decisions. And the data is everything to that decision. If you see the density over here is and your weakness is public transit, then you want to get at that, because that provides those folks with access to jobs, access to medical care, access to education, and the things that make a community thrive. And so, Charity, I know you're with the Center of Social Change. I mean, you all have to make decisions using data. When I talk about the Center for Social Change and how you're using data, and particularly census data, if you could.
Sure. One of the things I want to mention about looking at the data, which is another lens of this, is from the community mobilizing perspective and the grassroots perspective of using census data. One of which is looking at what neighborhoods have had a percentage decrease in levels of responsiveness from the previous years. So I was looking at a report this week. My sorority and my chapter, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated, Gamma Zeta Zeta chapter, is working with a project and other mobilizers through the National Pan-Atlantic Council to go out and do census caravans. Those caravans in the neighborhoods that we focus in on is guided directly by the information that we're getting in real time about levels and layers of responsiveness. And anyone who's curious, when we look at 2020census.gov, I believe is where you can find that. And you can do literally a search on your zip code for how you're utilizing that. So with social change, in particular, our program started, as Autumn knows, with working with PAC on the Near East Side under Dr. Patty Cunningham, who was the founder of Social Change at The Ohio State University, and just being privileged to be there to help do this work. But our students are directly in the center of whether it is protesting, evaluating social justice issues, looking at legislation. They're doing programming in the elementary schools, at the juvenile justice centers, at rehabilitation and correction centers. And those dollars that we're talking about with the census, not just on the community mobilization perspective of this, guide us and let us know what neighborhoods we need to have conversations with. Because it's not just enough for you to fill out the census yourself. Are you telling your neighbor? Yeah. Are you asking your family members? Are you counting everyone in your household, including foster children? I learned a lot about that on last week's chat when Sean Carter talked about where foster children fall, and then making sure that we get proper representation at the political level when we look at mobilizing students and mobilizing communities.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, think about $34 billion comes to Ohio based on census data. And with the work you're talking about, Charity, it really gets at some of our most vulnerable communities and really making sure that we're able to make decisions and have the medical care assistance, the supplemental nutritional assistance program, SNAP assistance, and all of the things, education and public transportation that go with that. But the one thing that I didn't hear any of you talk about that's also census related is census determines how we're represented in Congress. Our allocation of congressional seats is based on census data. And the state is trending in growth in the sort of southwestern region. And so we are in a competitive disadvantage with competing with growth states like Texas, who are going to pick up 2 and 3 seats every year. California, going to pick up several seats every year. But we're battling states like Georgia and North Carolina to where they're looking to gain and move up in population. And we're looking to potentially lose a seat. If people think about it, Congresswoman Beatty, one of the most popular congresspeople in Ohio, for sure, that seat was created in the last census, and we're in the first time it brought Columbus together to make basically Columbus a congressional seat, and so it's that kind of thinking that's just critical. And so if you're watching this or listening to this today, and I want to give a shout out to W. Shauna Gibbs, who just logged in, is watching. But if you haven't done your census form, I want to tell you, go to www.2020census.gov. That's www.2020census.gov. Or if you don't have access to the internet, you can certainly call a toll-free number at 844-330-2020. That's 844-330-2020. I just can't think of an easier way that you can get engaged in this conversation around race, health, and wealth in America for Black people. Now, you know, let's end this. We got 5 minutes to kind of wrap all this up, and so I got to choose my last question carefully. And I think what I'd like to do is maybe zero in on Franklin County declared that racism was a public health crisis. And I know everyone on this call is very familiar with why and what that means. But I'm gonna start with you, Dr. Gray. I mean, this is obviously, but I want to educate the public for those who say racism as a public health crisis. How is that? And that doesn't make sense, you know. And believe me, I get those letters and those calls. I get the hate mail and the people, you know, threatening me and all of those things, you know, from doing it. But maybe help if you all could help me articulate to the public. And we only got 4 minutes, so you got to keep your answer short. But articulate why racism is a public health crisis.
Just think, you know, to those watching, just think about those things that you may think about as public health crises. Maybe you think about, or maybe you were around when AIDS first started blowing up and you think about that as a public health crisis. Or maybe you think of, you know, COVID-19 as a public health crisis, bringing it closer to home. What all those things and racism have in common is that those things have limited people being able to lead healthier lives and in a just and fair manner. So we talk a lot about equity in this space as well. And so racism specifically not only is harmful to the public, it's deadly, as we've seen, as you saw, you know, in cases including, but certainly not limited to, Mr. George Floyd. But it's something that impedes our ability to be healthy as a society. And certainly, if we look at racism from the top, I think about it as a preeminent social determinant of health. And this is how it also plays in public health, because we think about how racism impacts housing, how people are put in certain neighborhoods or really feel restricted, I should say, to certain neighborhoods because of maybe income inequality, or maybe they are also overly exposed to toxins because of the neighborhood in which they live, or their kids don't have the same educational opportunities. And then you trickle down from there into some of the downstream health outcomes from all of those things, whether it be, diabetes, hypertension, or high blood pressure, elevated blood sugar or diabetes, cancer. A lot of these things stem from upstream factors such as poverty and discrimination, and racism. So it is a public health crisis. It impacts all of our society and world, and something that is detrimental to our health.
We just got a couple minutes, so I just need a quick short answer. So give me that one piece that will help this public understand why racism is a public health crisis. Somebody jump in.
I think Ray covered it really well, but the one thing that I would leave, and it's been something that I have thought about a lot in recent months, is that, and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar wrote a fabulous article where he said this, and it's really stuck in my mind, is racism is like dust in the air and it's choking Black people. And so when we think about it, it's everywhere, right? And we didn't see it until we turned on the light in this moment. And so it's something that we must address, that dust of racism. I think it's really hard for some people to imagine that this is in the background of our life every day. It's not just poor Black people, it's all Black people. And I intentionally call out Black people in particular because racism is affecting other groups, but in particular Black people. And we just have to be honest about that and own whatever lane we're going to drive in this road. But it's like dust in the air, and we've got to address it.
All right, just real quickly, Kyle, Charity.
Yep, just close real quick. So we've got inequality and despair that we see in our society. Some try to have a pervasive narrative that is the result of personal deficit, cultural flaws, when in fact it's the structures and institutions that have exploited people and discriminated against people. And so when we talk about racism, it isn't just some random thing that's out there. There are active systems that are oppressing people, and we've got to root that out. And you may disagree with the extent of injustices that are there, but it's there, and we need to root it out because it's the systems, it's not personal behavior.
Thank you. Charity?
I agree with everyone. I'm just going to use this brief amount of my time to say, make sure you're registered to vote. Make sure you check your address, check your family's address, and please be registered to vote. Your vote matters. That's how I'm going to use my time. Please vote.
Yeah.
Vote.
Thank you so much. And let me just thank my guests. You know, you all are busy folks and you're doing great things in the community. I mean that so sincerely. I think so highly of each of you. But let me end on this quote from Doug Williford. You know, as I shared with you, I got this letter, and embedded in the letter was this criticism about Black Lives Matter. And, you know, then there are those who say, well, all lives matter. And trying to understand, you know, why Black Lives Matter, I found this quote from Doug Williford that I want to share, and we'll end on this. He says, if my wife comes to me in obvious pain and asks, do you love me? And an answer of, well, I love everyone, it would be truthful, but also hurtful and cruel in the moment. If a coworker comes to me upset and says, my father just died, a response of, everyone's parents die, would be truthful, but hurtful and cruel in the moment. So when a friend speaks up in a time of obvious pain and hurt and says, Black lives matter, a response of all lives matter is truthful, but it's hurtful and cruel in the moment. I'm so blessed to have had you on today. I think things are changing, things are moving, and there's hope in the air. God bless. Thanks for coming on today. Tune in with me next week, Wednesday, 3 o'clock, same time, same place.